I never expected my sister's wedding to become the stage for my public humiliation, but there I was seated quietly in the third row, clutching a paper napkin like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The lights of the ballroom glinted off polished crystal and satin gowns, but all I could see was the look on my son's face, confused hurt, and far too young to understand why his mother had just been laughed at by her own family. I'm Rachel Morgan, 34, a single mother raising my 8-year-old son, Ethan. Life hasn't been easy, but it's been honest. I work 2 jobs, keep the lights on, and make pancakes every Saturday morning because that's what he loves. When I received the wedding invitation from my younger sister, Madison, I told myself it was a chance to reconnect, to maybe step out of the shadows for once and be seen. Instead, what I got was a toast that started sweet and ended with a cruel jab. Madison calling me unwanted, followed by our mother Caroline chiming in with, "She's a used product, but she still polishes up well." The laughter that followed was deafening, and just when I thought I would have to swallow it in silence like so many times before something happened, someone stood up and the room would never be the same. I never imagined that a day meant for joy and celebration could turn into a moment of profound humiliation. There I was, seated in the third row of my younger sister's wedding, wearing the only formal dress I owned, trying my best to blend into a room filled with polished and perfect guests. Beside me sat my 8-year-old son, Ethan, swinging his legs under the table in a little suit that cost me 2 paychecks. He looked so proud to be there, believing that this day would make us feel like part of the family again. Perhaps I hoped for the same. My sister, Emily, floated through the day like a movie star. She always had that energy, beautiful, charming, adored by everyone, especially our mother, Margaret. Emily received the compliments. I received the comparisons. She basked in the spotlight, while I learned to live in the shadows. Still, I showed up. I smiled. I clapped when they kissed. I kept my voice steady when people asked, "And you're the older sister, you don't look like you have an 8-year-old. Then came the speeches. The groom's best friend went first, some mildly funny anecdotes, light laughter. Then it was Emily's turn. I expected something sentimental, perhaps about love or growing up together. I even raised my glass in anticipation. I should have known better. She lifted her crystal flute and smiled out over the room. "Read it. I want to thank everyone for coming," she began, glowing. "It means the world to have you here. And of course, I want to say something special about my big sister." I turned to Ethan and smiled at him. He looked up at me with excitement. For a moment, I believed she was about to say something kind. Emily went on. "Anna's been such a role model. She's a single mom, strong, independent, and clearly unwanted by anyone else." The room erupted into laughter. My stomach flipped. I thought I misheard her, but she kept smiling like it was the most charming joke she'd ever told. Some guests looked confused, but most laughed harder, clinking their glasses like it was all in good fun. The laughter echoed in my ears, each chuckle a dagger to my heart. I sat frozen, my face flushed with embarrassment, my hands gripping the napkin in my lap like a lifeline. Ethan tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Why did she say that about you?" "Mom." Before I could answer, my mother, Margaret, added loudly from her table, not missing a beat, "She's a used product. But hey, she still looks good for her age." More laughter, sharper this time. It was the kind of laughter that cuts through skin, the kind that lets you know everyone sees you differently now. Not as a guest, not as family, but as entertainment, as pity, as shame. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My face burned, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not in front of my son. Not in front of them. I looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, who might meet my eyes and offer something resembling compassion. My grandfather looked down at his plate. My cousin smirked at her phone. Even my uncle, who once told me I reminded him of my late father, didn't look up. Ethan looked lost, his little eyebrows furrowed, confused and hurt. That was the part that broke me. Not the words, not the laughter, not the shame, the fact that my son was watching it all, trying to understand why his mother, the woman who kissed his scraped knees and stayed up late helping with his math homework, was being mocked by her own family. I wanted to leave. I wanted to grab Ethan's hand, walk out, and never look back. But something in me hesitated. I wanted to speak. I wanted to defend myself, to tell them they didn't know half of what I've carried, what I've survived. But my mouth was dry. My legs were trembling under the table. Then, before I could move, I heard a chair scrape back. Michael, the groom, Emily's perfect, polished fiancé, stood up slowly. He didn't look amused. He didn't look at Emily. He didn't look at the guests. His eyes went straight to me, and something in his face made the entire room freeze. In that instant, I knew something was about to happen. Not a rescue, not a fight, a reckoning. Michael took the microphone from Emily without asking. The room went silent. It was like the temperature dropped. No more laughter, no more whispers, just this stillness. And I knew whatever came next wasn't part of the plan. He looked directly at the guests. "I've heard a lot about family over the past year while planning this wedding," he said. "About appearances, tradition, loyalty. But what I just saw wasn't family. That was mockery dressed up as celebration." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some people glanced at Margaret. Others stared at their drinks. But no one spoke. He turned to Emily. "You mocked your sister for being a single mother, for raising a child without help. You laughed. And worse, you made her son watch it happen." Emily opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Michael didn't wait for her to answer. She didn't ask to be put in that position, but she did it. She showed up today. She sat in the back. She smiled. She brought her son to witness your big day, and you turned that into a joke. I had never seen Emily look small until that moment. Michael turned again to the room. "Anna didn't stand here to defend herself. She didn't ask for sympathy. She's never needed a stage. But I won't stay silent, because if I'm about to marry into a family that sees cruelty as humor and shame as tradition, then I need to reconsider what kind of man I want to be." A gasp rippled through the guests. A woman at the next table whispered, "Is this real?" Someone dropped a fork. Ethan looked up at me with wide eyes. I didn't know what to do. I'd come here expecting to survive the evening. I didn't expect to be defended. Not like this, not in front of everyone. Michael looked down at my son and gave him the softest nod. "Your mom's the strongest person in this room. Don't forget that." He turned back to the crowd one last time. "I think I've seen enough." With that, he set the microphone down, walked past Emily without another glance, and headed straight out the door. I stood there frozen, holding Ethan's hand. The music didn't start. The crowd didn't move. It was as if someone had drained all the air out of the room. The fairy tale had shattered, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one left broken. I still remember the moment I stepped into that hospital room as if it were yesterday. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the sterile space, and it felt loud enough to echo in my chest. There sat my father, Richard Rick Thompson, propped up in the bed, his once vibrant eyes fixed on a muted TV screen. He didn't flinch when I entered or when my grandson, Noah, tenderly squeezed my hand beside me. 3 years had passed since he closed the door on both of our lives after my mother's funeral, and not once during that time had he asked about us, much less invited us back. Knowing his age 71 and the fact that his workshop of gleaming motorcycles and old Corvettes had become as lonely as he looked now, I felt a familiar ache of loss. Rick had been a master mechanic, hands calloused from decades of turning wrenches, the garage filled with the smell of motor oil and fresh coffee. He believed in hard work and keeping emotions under lock and key. My mother, Grace, was the one who used to soften his edges, reminding him, Rick means well, but once she passed, the warmth drained away. I exhaled and forced a gentle smile. Hi, Dad, I said. My voice cracked on the word Dad. He didn't meet my eyes. He simply shifted the remote control in his hand. I heard you had a stroke, I went on, swallowing the lump in my throat, and I wanted to come see how you're doing. Still, nothing but I refused to show frustration. All those years of silent distance taught me restraint. Noah, now 6 years old, tugged at my sleeve and opened his tiny hand to reveal a small, silver horse keychain. I hadn't even noticed him slipping it from his pocket. He took a careful step forward, set it on the little tray table that held an untouched glass of water, and said in his soft, earnest voice, Grandpa, you dropped this 3 years ago. The room fell as silent as a tomb. My father's gaze finally flickered first to the keychain, then to Noah, then back to us. Recognition, as fleeting as a spark, lit his face. The keychain had belonged to Rick's beloved 1967 Corvette, the car he taught me to drive in when I was 16, inches from its roaring engine. He had left it behind the day of my mother's funeral, storming off without a word. I never thought I'd see it again. And yet here it was, carried by my little boy, who had found it in a dusty corner of Grandpa's garage on a day we visited last year. Rick's hand trembled not from the stroke, but from something older and deeper emotion. He reached out, his fingers brushing the smooth edges of the tiny horse. I had to swallow hard to keep from crying. He held it up, turning it slowly. Then, in a voice rough with unshed tears, he asked, Where did you get this, son? Grandpa and grandson locked eyes across that narrow room. Noah nodded and said quietly, I kept it safe. Rick's shoulders slumped as though a burden he'd carried for decades had been lifted. He exhaled a shuddering breath. I thought I lost this, he murmured, looking past Noah at me, and I thought I'd lost you, too. A tear slid down his cheek, though he didn't wipe it away. You came, he said, and I simply nodded because words failed me. Then he looked at his hand holding that keychain and bent forward, placing it back on the tray. He pressed the side of his palm against his chest, as if holding his heart in place. "Thank you," he whispered to Noah, and then to me. "Thank you for coming." We spent the next hour in that room, not in awkward silence, but in quiet conversation. Rick told us stories about fixing his Corvette's carburetor by moonlight, how he and Mom would dance in that very garage to old country records. Noah, wide-eyed and curious, asked more questions than I could count. Rick answered each one, hesitant at first, then with growing warmth. Over the next weeks, we returned regularly. Rick, still weak from his stroke, practiced walking with a cane in the hallway. Noah would proudly walk beside him, offering his small hand for support. I watched Rick start to transform slower to anger, gentler in speech. He asked me how I was doing, about my nursing job at the clinic, and about Noah's first-grade class. He even remarked on Noah's lanky 6-year-old frame, predicting he'd grow to be a tall kid, like his old grandpa. In late spring, when the rehab center assigned Rick a new room with a view of the courtyard, he surprised me by placing a small ceramic horse statue on his bedside table, a gift to Noah, for keeping my memory alive, he said. Noah clutched it to his chest like gold. That tiny silver keychain had accomplished something I once thought impossible. It reopened a door Rick had slammed shut. It reminded him of who he was before loss hardened his heart. And it reminded me that healing often arrives in the simplest forms, a child's small act of kindness, a well-worn piece of metal dropped in a driveway, a moment of recognition that says, "I remember you." As summer turned into fall, Rick returned home to his handcrafted birdhouses, his red pickup truck, and to us. He and Noah spent Saturday mornings tinkering with a project in the garage, teaching him to sand and varnish wood. I watched them from the kitchen window, my heart full. The distance of years dissolved in that warm California light. I learned that day, standing in that hospital room, that no wound is too deep to begin mending, and no bridge too broken to rebuild. All it takes is a small keychain, a brave child, and a father willing to look up and be seen once again. I'll never forget the hush that fell over the Lincoln Middle School auditorium the moment my daughter's music ended, a hush so complete it felt as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. My name is Margaret Collins, and I've been raising my 9-year-old daughter, Olivia, on my own ever since her father walked out of our lives 5 years ago. We live in a modest, split-level home in suburban Indianapolis, and every penny I earn from my 2 jobs, first as a library clerk during the day, then as a server at a 24-hour diner at night, goes toward keeping Olivia fed, clothed, and most importantly, believing in herself. When Olivia asked to sign up for her school's annual talent show, I was equal parts excited and terrified. She had taught herself to compose melodies on a second-hand keyboard I'd found at a garage sale for $50, and her music had the haunting sweetness of someone twice her age. But I knew how kids could be. I watched her practice in the evenings, her small fingers tentative on the keys, her brows furrowed in concentration, the single broken B key of her keyboard stubbornly sticking when she played, but I never imagined how cold a crowd could sound. On the night of the show, Olivia arrived wearing her favorite pale blue dress too large, but patched up lovingly, and her hair in braids that always make her seem both older and younger at once. She stood backstage trembling, clutching her sheet music as if it were a lifeline. When her name was called, I tucked a dollar bill into her pocket and whispered, "You belong here." She took a deep breath, stepped out under the harsh stage lights, and began to play. The first few notes floated out like a secret just shared, but as her melody drifted around the room, I noticed the audience shifting uncomfortably, some parents chatting behind their hands, some students snickering. One judge even glanced at her phone. And then I heard a whisper from mid-audience. "That's the poor girl. The one with the single mom." My heart constricted. Olivia faltered on the next chord. I wanted to storm the stage, pull her away, protect her from that cruelty. Instead, I found myself frozen in my seat, tears threatening to spill. But before I could move, something remarkable happened. From the very back row, a man rose. He was tall and dressed in a simple gray suit, nothing flashy, just quiet confidence. The murmur in the room died instantly. He walked down the center aisle, and every eye followed him. No one stopped him. He reached the front, and instead of speaking into the microphone, he turned, nodded at Olivia, and held out his hand. The judges and parents exchanged puzzled glances, but he simply said, "May I have this?" and stepped onto the stage without waiting for permission. He introduced himself as Dr. Edward Monroe, a retired piano professor from Juilliard who'd come to watch his granddaughter perform. "But what I just heard," he said, his voice calm and steady, was something far more precious and original composition. He addressed Olivia directly. "Would you play it again? This time, may I accompany you?" In that moment, the world shifted. Olivia's small frame seemed to expand as she slid onto the bench beside him. "Doctor." Monroe laid a gentle, supporting chord beneath her melody, and together they transformed her solitary tune into a soaring duet. Every note seemed to illuminate the room. Parents sat on the edges of their seats, judges lowered their clipboards, students stopped whispering. When they reached the final, delicate chord, absolute stillness reigned for a heartbeat, then applause burst like a dam breaking. It wasn't polite applause. It was raw, wholehearted, grateful. Strangers cheered. Some wiped away tears. Olivia's face shone with relief and pride. She looked at Dr. Monroe as if she'd just met a hero. Afterwards, one of the judges approached us. "Your daughter's music was the highlight of the evening," she said. "Dr." Monroe smiled and tapped a card on the keyboard bench. "For Olivia Collins' Juilliard Youth Mentorship Program." He told us about weekend intensives and private lessons, offered without audition or fee. "Talent like hers deserves to be nurtured," he said. I watched Olivia cradle that card as if it were the most valuable gift she'd ever received. That night, instead of feeling small and ashamed, she felt seen. She felt worthy. And for the first time in years, I believed the world could be kinder than it often seems. Now, every Saturday we drive an hour to the conservatory, Olivia wide awake at dawn, clutching her notebook of new melodies. She still plays that first piece, only now it's fuller, richer, and no longer tinged with the sting of laughter. It reminds her that her voice matters. And it reminds me that sometimes all it takes to change a young life is one person willing to stand up, walk forward, and say, "You deserve to be heard." I will never forget the sound of that empty box sliding to the floor. It was Chloe's 10th birthday, and she had been clutching a handmade card and a sparkly bow for hours, waiting for her grandfather, Bill, to arrive. When she finally tore off the wrapping paper and peered inside the package he'd handed her, her face fell. The box was completely empty. For a moment I thought perhaps the gift had fallen out, but the crisp cardboard bottom told me there was nothing more to find. Before Chloe could even blink back tears, Bill let out a sharp laugh, folding his arms as if he'd delivered the punchline of a joke. "Kids like you shouldn't expect anything," he barked, sitting back in his armchair. My heart sank. I'd driven nearly 20 miles from our small duplex in Cedar Grove so that Chloe could see the man who used to build birdhouses with her. Instead, she got humiliation. Then Aunt Karen leaned forward from the sofa, gum smacking in her cheek. "She's just like her mother," she snapped. "Always wanting handouts." I felt blood rush to my face, but I forced myself to sit still. Chloe's tiny shoulders hunched, her lower lip quivering. She looked at me, eyes wide with hurt, as though she needed permission to break. Instead, she took a steadying breath and stood. "Grandpa," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I have something for you. Two." From the pocket of her party dress, she pulled a folded piece of paper, her birthday card, covered in glitter and crayons. Everyone leaned in. Chloe stepped forward and held it out with both hands. "Merry birthday," she said. "Grandpa," he looked at that card as if it might bite him. Then slowly, hesitantly, he took it. As he unfolded the paper, his jaw loosened, and I saw something flash in his eyes. Recognition, regret, something I hadn't seen since my childhood. He traced the scribbled drawing of the two of them under a bright sun, labeled "Best Grandpa Ever." He folded the card carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket without a word, then quietly left the room. For the rest of the day, Chloe didn't speak of it. We left early, the cake half eaten on the dining room table at home. Yet 4 days later, an unmarked box arrived on our porch. Inside was a small wooden music box, hand-carved with roses around the lid. When I turned the crank, it played "You Are My Sunshine," our family's song. A note fell out. "To the bravest girl I know, thank you for reminding me who I used to be." Chloe pressed the box to her chest and smiled the first genuine smile I'd seen since that afternoon. She tucked it into her bedroom on top of her dresser. A new treasure. That evening, another letter came, this one addressed to me, in Grandpa's careful handwriting. "I was wrong about you. Chloe's a good kid. I hope you're doing okay." There was no signature, but I didn't need it. I realized that in that single, brave gesture, my daughter had done more than give a drawing. She had cracked through years of buried grief and silence. She had reminded her grandfather that kindness can heal old wounds. Chloe still keeps the music box on her nightstand. Every night before she falls asleep, she winds it up and listens to the melody. I watch her from the doorway and remember that sometimes the smallest act a child's drawing, a simple gift, can change everything. That day, my daughter taught me that courage isn't loud. It's an open hand, offered without expectation, and that love, once given, can soften even the hardest of hearts. I still remember the day I walked into family court, my heart pounding so loudly I feared the judge would hear it. "My name is Sharon Mitchell, and I've been raising my 2 children, Jack 7 and Emily 4, on my own ever since their father, Tom Reynolds, walked out 2 years ago." I worked 2 jobs, morning shifts at a local diner and afternoons as a receptionist at a dentist's office just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I scraped together every cent for rent, utilities, and daycare, but somehow I never felt like it was enough. Tom had hired a high-powered attorney, a polished woman in an immaculately tailored suit who strode into the courtroom as though she owned it. I stood before Judge Walters in my best court clothes, a navy blazer and skirt I'd borrowed from a friend, clutching a worn folder of school records. A letter from our landlord confirming my rent was always on time, and photographs of my children happily playing in our modest backyard. I felt exposed and vulnerable as Tom's lawyer laid out her attack. "My client," she proclaimed, "provides a stable environment, owns his home outright, and can give Jack and Emily the opportunity your client simply cannot." She clicked through her slideshow of Tom's pristine 3-bedroom house, complete with hardwood floors and a finished basement. While the judge nodded politely, I sat on the edge of my seat, determined not to cry, determined not to let Jack and Emily see me break. I knew what poverty looked like. I had lived it. I had sold my wedding ring to pay for winter coats. I had cleaned other people's homes in cash to make sure the electricity stayed on. But none of that mattered to the judge until my 7-year-old boy, with his untucked polo shirt and untidy sweatpants, stood up and said, "Mommy, may I show the judge something?" The courtroom froze. I blinked at Jack. Where had he gotten the courage? He strode forward, miniaturized but unwavering, and handed Judge Walters a folded piece of paper. The judge adjusted his glasses, glanced at Tom's attorney, then carefully unfolded it. A hush settled like a prayer. Jack's trembling little voice carried through the still air. "This is a letter I found in Dad's safe." The judge read aloud the letterhead from Charles Bennett, CPA, subject divorce preparedness. His eyes flicked from the page back to Tom. The letter detailed instructions for hiding assets offshore accounts, shell corporations, transferring funds to avoid detection so that Tom would appear financially overextended and thus weaken my claim to custody and child support. My breath caught in my throat. Tom's face drained of color. His attorney pivoted in her chair, her confidence crumbling. "Judge Walters," voice firm, asked Tom, "would you care to explain this?" Tom stammered, insisting the letter was old and never used. The judge cut him off. "This court cannot condone intentional deceit to manipulate child custody. We will pause these proceedings for a formal financial investigation. Until then, primary custody remains with Ms. Mitchell, and Mr. Reynolds' visitation is suspended." I felt my legs give out. My children rushed to my side, Jack, who had done the unthinkable, and Emily, clutching her stuffed bunny with wide eyes. I scooped them both into my arms, tears finally spilling over, not from shame, but relief and gratitude. Jack whispered, "I just wanted to help." I held him tight and whispered back, "You saved us." Over the next few weeks, a court-appointed investigator uncovered Tom's hidden accounts and long-buried financial statements proving he had lied to the court. When we returned for the final hearing this time with pro bono counsel from a legal aid clinic, I walked in feeling taller. The judge's ruling granted me full physical and legal custody, ordered Tom to pay back child support, and mandated that any future visitation would be supervised until further notice. That victory didn't erase the years of struggle. I still balance work and parenthood, still clip coupons and shop sale racks, but I no longer carry the fear that my children could be taken from me because of what I lacked on paper. And my children know something deeper about justice and truth, that even the smallest voice an honest, courageous 7-year-old can tip the scales when all seems against you. Now, whenever I see Jack practicing letters at our kitchen table or Emily lining up her dolls to perform a pretend courtroom, I smile with pride. My son taught me and everyone in that courtroom that love isn't measured in net worth or square footage. Love is what drives you to speak up, to hold tight, and to believe that the truth, once heard, can set you free. I watched my daughter, Megan, beam down the aisle in her flowing ivory gown, every bit the radiant bride she deserved to be, while her biological father, Richard, lounged in the front row, checking his watch more than he checked her. I'm Lisa Harmon, and I've spent the last decade rebuilding our small family after Richard walked away when Megan was only 11. He resurfaced only to offer funding for the wedding, a gesture that felt more like a power play than an apology. When Megan asked him to give a toast, she told me she wanted him to have the chance to show up for her in a way he never had. I warned her that weddings can bring out people's worst instincts. But she insisted on hope. So, there he was, crystal flute in hand, smiling at the sea of guests who'd gathered to celebrate her union with David. A man whose gentle kindness has filled every corner of Megan's life since they met in college. At first, Richard's speech seemed harmless, a few jokes about the ceremony's length, flattering remarks about the buffet, and polite nods to tradition. He raised his glass and looked directly at Megan and David, voice warm. To my daughter, who's grown into an amazing woman. Heads nodded and glasses clinked in anticipation. Smart. Beautiful. And, well, I hope your new husband can handle damaged goods. The words landed like a sucker punch. Laughter erupted, some awkward, some genuine, and in that instant every smile in the room turned cruel. Megan froze, her lips parting as though to speak, but her voice abandoned her. My heart lurched. I snapped to my feet, ready to storm the head table, to grab the microphone and declare that Richard had no right to mock her unhealed wounds on her happiest day. But before I could move, David rose. He swept past the guests as if compelled by gravity, knelt beside Megan, and slipped a folded letter into her hand. Wordlessly, he whispered, "He doesn't deserve this moment. Read it." The room fell so silent you could hear the breeze outside. Even the string quartet paused mid-tremolo. I sank back into my seat, breath hitching. Megan unfolded the paper, her fingers trembling. She rose to her full height, eyes bright despite the tears she fought back, and began to read. Megan, you are not broken. You are whole strong, brave, and worthy of love that never questions your value. Those who see you as anything less are looking through their own insecurities. You rose above every trial I failed to help you with. And today, you step forward into a future built on your own courage. Know this, you are not damaged goods. You are exactly who you were meant to be. Her voice grew steadier with each line. I watched Richard shrink beneath the weight of those words, his smug posture dissolving into stunned silence. When she finished, the applause that erupted was no polite afterthought, but a wave of genuine, collective awe. Strangers stood and cheered. Tears sparkled on cheeks throughout the room. Megan turned to David, and he lifted her hand, placing a tender kiss on her knuckles. It was the kind of moment that restores faith in love. Later, Richard slipped out through the side door, shoulders hunched. Without a final word, his absence left a tangible emptiness that no amount of champagne could fill. But for Megan, that absence was a gift, the realization that no amount of money or bloodline entitlement could define her worth. As guests returned to dancing and laughter, Megan and David shared their first waltz as a married couple. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, tears in my eyes, and whispered to her, "You've always been enough." She looked up and smiled a smile unburdened by the past, illuminated by the promise of all the joy still to come. That evening reminded me that true honor isn't bestowed by a father's name or a father's fortune, but by those who choose to stand up for you when it counts. Megan didn't need her father's blessing. She had David's unwavering support and the knowledge that her own voice, once silenced, now carried the power to transform an entire room. And in that transformation, she claimed the life she deserved, undiminished, unashamed, and utterly whole. I never imagined I'd feel so small in a room dressed in silk and surrounded by champagne flutes. Yet there I was, sitting in the third row at my sister Vivian's wedding, wearing the only formal dress I could afford, my 8-year-old son, Lucas, perched beside me in a hand-me-down suit 2 sizes too big, had beamed all afternoon, convinced that today our family would finally see me, the single mom who'd carved out every inch of my life with grit and pride. Maybe I believed it too, until Vivian took the microphone. She started with the usual platitudes, thank yous to guests, nods to tradition, but then the tone shifted. "Of course," she said, lifting her crystal glass. "I have to thank my big sister. She's a role model, a single mom, strong and independent, and clearly unwanted by anyone else." A jolt of laughter rolled through the tables. My stomach turned. I thought I'd misheard, until my own mother called out, "She's a used product, but she still looks good for her age," and the room roared. I froze, fingers twisting the edge of my napkin, refusing to let tears betray me. Lucas tugged at my sleeve, whispering, "Mom, why is she saying that?" His eyes, so full of confusion and hurt, broke me more than Vivian's words. I scanned the crowd. Grandpa Norman stared at his plate. Cousin Derek scrolled on his phone, and Aunt Judith's smirk widened as she raised her glass to join in the mockery. No one met my gaze. No one offered a hint of compassion. I wanted to leave, to whisk Lucas away from all this cruelty, but something held me in place. After all I'd sacrificed 2 jobs, 1,000 sleepless nights, I refused to vanish again. I steeled myself to speak out, determined to defend my dignity. My throat went dry. My legs shook. Then I heard the scrape of a chair behind me. Callum, Vivian's fiancé, stood. He didn't smile or joke. He didn't glance at Vivian or the guests. His eyes locked on me, and with that single look, the laughter died. He took the microphone from Vivian without ceremony. The room fell silent, no chatter, no music, nothing but the soft hum of the hall. I felt Lucas squeeze my hand as if sensing the shift. "Stop," Callum said, voice low but unwavering. "I can't let that go unchallenged." He stepped forward, every stride measured, until he stood beside our table. I've heard a lot about family, about loyalty and tradition, but that was mockery dressed up as celebration. He paused, letting the words settle. Heads turned. Glasses paused mid-clink. He faced Vivian. "You made your sister stand there. holding her son, just so the room could laugh at her pain. That's not love. That's cruelty. Vivian opened her mouth, but no sound came. Callum then addressed our mother, and you laughed louder than anyone. If this is what family means to you, then I need to reconsider what I'm marrying into. The silence stretched. No one knew how to fill it. Callum looked down at me and Lucas. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't need pity, just respect. And she certainly didn't need an audience mocking her in front of her child. He straightened. I won't stand here and let that happen. Then, without another word, he set the mic down and walked out, his back perfectly straight. The crowd sat motionless. I felt Lucas shiver beside me. After a long moment, I stood chest aching, head swimming, but I felt different, lighter. Somehow. Aunt Judith finally spoke, indignantly defending Vivian, but her words fell flat. The power she wielded all those years evaporated in an instant. I didn't respond. Callum had given me the gift of dignity. I didn't need to participate in their excuses. Lucas whispered, "Can we go home?" I nodded, gathering him in my arms. As we passed through the stunned guests, I felt eyes on me, some avoiding, some ashamed. Grandpa Norman rose and caught up with us. His eyes were red. His voice shook as he said, "I'm sorry. I should have done something long ago." I smiled at him, forgiving but firm. "We're fine," I said. "It's over." Outside, the air was cool and bright. Lucas pressed his head against my shoulder and asked, "Mom, are you okay?" I hugged him and whispered, "I am now." He squeezed back and said, "You're my hero." That night, I lay awake thinking about what had happened. Vivian and Callum's wedding never resumed. He called it off quietly, and our mother's calls went unanswered. But I realized something vital. I no longer needed their approval. I walked into that reception hall expecting shame, but I walked out with my head held high. I had my son's hand and a fierce truth in my heart. I am worthy. I am strong. And no one can ever take that away. I sat across from my so-called family in a mahogany-paneled conference room, my heart pounding so hard I thought the lawyer might ask me to leave the table. My name is Julia Thompson, and 3 years ago I left my father and his toxic expectations behind, carrying only my 2-year-old son, Noah, and the clothes on our backs. I'd rebuilt our life from scratch, but nothing prepared me for this moment, the reading of my father's will. Or so I thought. From the moment I stepped inside, I felt the tension. My Aunt Karen arched a perfectly manicured brow and whispered, "He hated her." Uncle Rick's lips curled into an ominous smirk as he nudged my cousin Paul. I took my seat at the far end of the long table number 9, as if I were a piece of meat to be carved up while they staked their claims on the lake house, the business shares, and the vintage car collection. Mr. Connolly, my father's lawyer, opened a thick manila envelope and began reading aloud the dry legalese that destined every asset to someone else. Except me. I wasn't even mentioned. I held my breath, waiting for a last-minute twist that would prove he hadn't really meant it, that he remembered me after all. Instead, the room settled on the usual suspects. Aunt Karen inherited the primary residence, Uncle Rick the business, my cousins the collectibles, and me, I was deceased. A legal footnote. I felt anger, Shame and sorrow crumpled together in my chest. Noah tugged at my skirt. "Mom," he whispered, confusion in his big brown eyes. I forced a smile, crushing back tears, determined not to break in front of him or them. Then the door opened, and Connolly returned with another envelope smaller, white, addressed in my father's unmistakable cursive, "For the lawyer only if it gets ugly." Whispers swirled as he handed it to the judge. Connolly's face went pale. He inserted a USB drive into his laptop and cleared his throat. "This is a video message, recorded by Charles Thompson prior to his death, to be viewed only in the event of a contested will." My breath caught. I watched the judge hit play, and there, on the screen, was my father's familiar study bookshelves behind him, globe in the corner and his weary, unguarded face. "Julia," he began, voice trembling, "if you're watching this, I'm gone, and it seems I've hurt you one last time." His eyes glistened with regret. He confessed how he'd lashed out in anger when I left, how he'd let pride keep me at arm's length. He admitted he'd manipulated assets to punish me, not realizing how deeply it would wound Noah and me. Then he leaned forward, clasped his hands. "I changed the will. I want the house and its contents to go to you, Julia, and I've set up a trust for Noah's college. I may be gone, but I want you both to be secure. I'm sorry I left you feeling like you meant nothing. I was wrong." I sat frozen as the room spun around me. Karen gasped. Rick's jaw dropped. The lawyer replayed the message until every word sank in. Then the judge looked up. "Mr. Thompson's last wishes are clear. Julia Thompson is the primary beneficiary, with his grandchildren's trust established." He paused and declared my custody of the estate immediate and uncontested. My legs gave way. Noah rushed into my lap. His small arms wrapped around me as I wept, not from shame, but from relief, from the realization that my father had remembered me after all. The cousins slunk away in silence, no longer confident or smug, and I, the daughter who'd once felt erased, now held the key to our future, both the literal house my father loved and the inheritance of his love and regret. Outside, the autumn air was crisp as I carried Noah to the car. I glanced back at the courtroom window, imagining my father's spirit finally at peace. That day taught me that sometimes healing isn't loud or immediate. It comes through a quiet confession and a digital recording made years ago. And for us, it was the final, unexpected gift that proved we'd always mattered. I stood frozen in the hospital doorway as my 6-year-old son, Noah, placed a tiny silver horse keychain on his grandpa's tray, whispering, "You dropped this 3 years ago." In that single, brave act offered without resentment, he cracked the wall of silence my father had built since Grandma's funeral. I'm Emma Blake, a single mom who'd long ago given up hope of ever being welcomed back into my dad's life. Yet there he was, eyes flickering with recognition, clutching that bent little souvenir as though it were a lifeline to a past he thought he'd lost. That moment taught me something profound. Healing often arrives not with grand apologies, but with the simplest gestures of remembrance. My son's unguarded kindness reminded my father who he used to be, a loving man beneath layers of pride and regret. It showed me that reconciliation isn't about erasing old wounds, but about offering a hand even when you're not sure it will be taken. In the days that followed, my father and I didn't dissect every hurt or demand explanations. We rebuilt trust through quiet visits, shared cups of hospital room coffee, and the slow return of stories about Grandma's laugh, her favorite songs, her gentle advice. Today, the music box he sent me etched with roses and playing our family tune sits on Noah's nightstand, a symbol that forgiveness, once offered, carries its own melody. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below to share your own experiences of unexpected reconciliation. And if you believe in the power of small acts to change whole lives, hit subscribe. Let's build a community that remembers, reaches out, and heals together.